Welcome to the conversation today. We have a special guest from Antwerp, Belgium. So before we do, let's introduce Denise, my co-host. Hello, Denise. Welcome.
Hi, Barry. How are you? Thank you. Hi, Gunther. How are you?
I'm fine, Denise. Thank you.
Good, good. And welcome, everyone. This should be a very interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So, Gunther, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, I'll try to keep that short, otherwise
Okay.
you only have 30 minutes, you know. So my name is Gunther Verheyen. That's how we say it in Belgium. I'm from Belgium, like Barry said. I live in Antwerp. Long time ago, I imagine how time flies. You know, imagine 30 minutes, but I've been doing this Scrum and Agile thing like 16 years now, I realized.
Wow.
So September 2003, we started with a project that still had to start and was already over time, was already late, you know, those types of things. Sort of some tension, some pressure that got us into doing something that was called extreme programming by then, 2003. And then later on, we were already late and still we turned it into a success by the iterative incremental approach and all of the very tight collaboration with people. So, and that's from that day on, September 2003, I never did anything else. So we added Scrum to that, we named a couple of things, we kept doing a lot of extreme programming practices, wrapped by Scrum, and it never stopped, and I still love it. It still gives me so much energy. Although, you know what they say, Scrum, it's a simple framework, it's very simple, it's lightweight, it doesn't have too many instructions. And still, after 16 years, I'm still enjoying this. So after the 6 years ago, I'm not going over those 16 years. 6 years ago, I left a large consulting company, sort of beyond my own 2 feet. First worked 3 years exclusively with Scrum.org. I don't know whether you know the organization of Ken Schwaber, one of the 2 co-creators of Scrum. But almost 4 years ago, I decided to be really on my own. And I had to think about a title for myself and sort of a role. What am I doing? You know what? But I'm a one-person company, and I found it sort of silly to call myself CEO of my one-person company, because I can call myself the marketing director too, and I'm sort of everything. So I figured in 2016, what is it that I really want to do? What's my passion? And that's when I started calling myself Scrum Caretaker, because that's something that drives me. I care not just for Scrum, I also care for people. I care for what Scrum does with people and how people experience or live Scrum. So Scrum is for me people and products. And I felt like in 2016, I want to focus on that sort of human aspect a little bit more. Because in those first 20, 25 years of Scrum, a lot of the focus has been sort of on the, almost, can I say that, almost the technicalities of the Scrum framework. How to build better products. So we've moved away from faster to better products, higher customer satisfaction and so on. But I think we still miss the sort of what I call the humanizing the workplace part. So Scrum can really help people humanize their workplace. And the way I see it is sort of more engaged people who love to do their job will build better products. And people that like to build products, give them the room to self-organize and regularly change course and change direction and self-develop, they will become more engaged. So engagement of people and building better products should go sort of hand in hand. And that sort of got me into calling myself nowadays what I call myself independent Scrum Caretaker.
Interesting. I know that when you were talking about the human piece of it, in reading some of your articles and writings, you had talked about that Scrum is more about behavior than it is about process. And you also have those 5 values of Scrum. So when you were talking about those 5 values of Scrum, when you were, did that, the behavior and the human aspect of it, did that influence those 5 values of Scrum?
Yeah, and again, it's a sort of hand-in-hand story. You know, behavior has sort of those 2 aspects. So it's sort of how you behave is driven by what you believe in. Let's say what your values are. Now the Scrum values are just sort of, can I say, almost 5 meaningless words. You have to give them meaning. You have to translate them to your context. And what I like about the 5 Scrum values, that they're so powerful because they actually translate into tangible behaviors. So it's more than just words somewhere, you know, fluffy up there in the sky somewhere. They actually translate into behaviors. But then you have to translate them too. And then you end up with sort of what I call the principles underlying Scrum. It's mainly empiricism, empirical process control, or the regular process of inspection adaptation, which is based on on complexity and unpredictability. So that context, together with the second aspect of Scrum, so besides empiricism, what I call self-organization, the ability and the room and the space for people to organize their own work within certain boundaries, those 2 aspects together then with the Scrum values, they translate into behavior. And that's what I like about the Scrum values. And whenever people think, yeah, but should we then first get the values in place before we can start doing Scrum? It's not the one or the other. The 2 go hand in hand. But let's call it the process of Scrum is so different from what people are used to do that there's a lot of value also in focusing on the practices of Scrum, doing them almost blindly, following them, doing them almost by the book, and then regularly reflecting on them and tying them back to the values. What does this mean to our values? And then from the values, maybe get more out of the practices. So the 2 go hand in hand. It's not practices only, it's not values only, but practices actually are a really good start. But practices should serve in the end to almost ingrain a new way of behaving. And over the years, the past couple of decades, we have prevented a lot of, we have impeded or blocked a lot of self-organization. We have blocked change. So practices and behavior, they go hand in hand, but it's going to take a while before we unleash that sort of potential that every human being has. Yeah.
It sounds like a bit of Gunther. It sounds like a bit of like mind and body, for instance, or people that are yoga is an example, right? On one hand, it's really a physical thing, but on the other hand, it's a mental thing, and you don't really separate it. It's kind of integrated. So I'm kind of hearing like there's this integration or between the 2 sides of the process and the system Scrum, and then the human part of Scrum, because we are all a bunch of humans and we're all kind of working in that piece. Do I have that kind of, did I unpack? Is that the way you see it, or you want to say more about it?
It is perfect. We have this sort of false separation of things. It's not only practice. The problem, but certainly with a lot of what people would call an agile transformation, is certainly that a lot of the transformations that I see are focused only on the practices. They forget to make room for the human aspect, the behavior, the values, and so on. But it already starts by the fact that, you know, people read the Scrum guide, clear, simple, lightweight document, 19 pages only, but they don't look behind sort of, or what is written in between the lines, the behavior. The Scrum guide is not just a checklist of things that you should do. It actually describes how people behave within that framework called Scrum. But a lot of people don't look beyond you know, the three roles, the 3 artifacts and the 5 events. And they forget that how those things are sort of interlinked, they're interconnected. So it's why we call Scrum a sort of complex adaptive system in itself. You've got all these individual elements, but the real power, the potential of Scrum is in the fact that they're all connected to each other. So sort of the whole being bigger than just the sum of the individual parts. And so looking beyond the formal elements that you need to have in place to sort of be able to call yourself Scrum, meaning the 3 roles, events, and the artifacts, it's sort of the rules that connects those things. So it's more about first level, what you do with those elements of Scrum, how you behave, how you interact over them. So it's more about interaction, sort of the rules. And then beyond that, it's the principles like self-organization and empiricism, and that connected to the values. So Scrum as a system is not just the rules, it's the rules, the elements in place, the rules that connect them, the values and the principles. And then there's a lot of openness in Scrum, because Scrum says, Scrum is what I call a skeleton process. Scrum sort of creates a skeleton process, but somebody has to add sort of the flesh and the meat and to that skeleton, meaning practices, tactics. How do you do those things? How do you manage product backlog? How do you actually interact with each other? How do you work with stakeholders and so on? Scrum has no exact tactical rules for that, how to do that tactically. So that makes it seemingly very difficult for a lot of organizations, because they only look at sort of the elements of Scrum, and then they often try to map them against existing rules or existing elements and existing rules that they have in place. So what happens often is that they just rename an existing thing, and that's not going to help. Plus, they should be able to look beyond that a little bit. And it leads to what I call, I think by the beginning of this year, to a lot of what I call illusions of agility. So a lot of companies, why are they actually adopting Scrum without going into the technicalities of Scrum, more investigating into why are you doing this? It's some sort of hope for increasing their agility, meaning speed, flexibility, responsiveness, higher customer satisfaction, quicker on the market. And they sort of overlook the fact that maybe agility also is a result of more engaged people, more engaged teams. So, and that's why I call it, Denise, Scrum is more about behavior than it is about process. Process is just a very fundamental, basic, almost start of things. Via the practice of Scrum, the sort of by the book implementation of Scrum, I certainly hope that a lot of people would discover that the real potential in Scrum is how the people in that Scrum framework, how they behave, how they interact, how do they collaborate with each other, and that's then driven by the value. So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question? When you're working with organizations, and do you work with leadership to change maybe their values or their culture? I mean, how does culture and leadership come into that when you're trying to implement the principles and the values of Scrum?
Yeah, well, there's two aspects. Let's start with leadership, and I will come back on culture. Leadership, absolutely, because you cannot properly, that's such a silly word, but you cannot properly adopt, introduce, employ Scrum without impacting or changing the organization. That is plainly impossible. You cannot, a lot of companies, that's also part of that illusion of
to your
agility.
point, there's an illusion that you're changing it, but you're not, right?
Yeah, it's what I call, more agile teams does not create a more agile organization. It seems that a lot of companies think that, yeah, this agile thing and this whatever Scrum process, that's for the team. So they establish little, small, micro Scrum teams, but all within the existing structures, the existing silos, the existing departments, the existing separations. So they're not using Scrum to almost transcend those separations. And it's the separations that are the problem. And they think that it's sort of something that happens at the team level. Nobody looks at what's beyond that. How do they do governance? How do they organize quality? How is their connection with the outside world, the market opportunities, often product management departments. So Scrum is so much more the problem. It's not a problem, it's a good thing, I believe. Scrum just doesn't say how an organization should look like. Scrum says how to build great products with engaged people, how to try to engage people. You can't get the full benefits out of Scrum without changing or impact the organization. Now that's a sort of, I think, I like that, a little bit of naivety. So we're a little bit naive by limiting ourselves to describing how a good Scrum ecosystem should work, knowing that people will run into a number of problems, often within the organization. And we are, can I say that, beautifully naive in thinking that by highlighting those problems, what we call impediments in Scrum, that people would tackle them. it seems that people would initially prefer to wipe them under the carpet again and not change or update or the organization. And that's a bit unfortunate, but I feel it's good that we are not saying how an agile Scrum, whatever organization should look like. We should believe that if we pinpoint the real problems, that we get to help people sort them out. So when I go to, so I do a lot of things besides writing and doing beautiful webinars like this. So thank you for having me. I also try to do some classes and also consulting with organizations. And at some point in time, I'm a little bit in a fortunate position because I sometimes encounter people that want to work with me, so that I don't really have to beg, you know. And I'm in a fortunate position, so I made up for myself 3 criteria, saying that before engaging, starting doing consulting work with an organization, I want to have sort of 3 prerequisites fulfilled. And the first one is, it has to be personal. So I don't do bids, I don't do requests for proposals and so on, public things where people are played out against each other in companies and so on. And you know, in the end, the cheapest always wins. Nobody admits it, but that's in the end. So I always want to go via some personal connection. So that's one thing. The next thing is, and that's unfortunate, maybe I only know this thing called Scrum. So it has to be about Scrum. There has to be, otherwise I'm lost anyhow. So, but the first thing is, I want to feel that for the organization that wants to work with me, I want to feel that it is serious. Meaning I have to feel that there's some sort of urgency. There must be a sense of urgency. I don't care whether they actually understand Scrum. I want to feel, is there some sort of seriousness, some urgency? Are really going for really deep? Are you ready to embark on a journey of real change? And that is often expressed by me asking for access to the leadership team first. So that's often management teams, often the CXO team with or the board or the directors, whatever. I want to talk to those people first. And the first question is always start with why. Why are we here? Why are you as a leadership team interested in this thing called Agile and potentially my way of doing Agile called Scrum? Without going to Scrum, what problems are you trying to solve? Where are you feeling the pain? What are you trying to get out of? So that's my view on leadership team. So I want to feel that seriousness, that urgency at the leadership team level, so that I at least can relate how we're going to implement Scrum, because it's a skeleton process. There's so many choices that we can make, so that we make the choices to try to remove the biggest problems first. So, that's often strange because a lot of companies just want to do Scrum because everybody else is doing Scrum too. And the problem is that's not helpful in the way that we will run into serious problems by introducing Scrum. We will run into impediments, organizational problems, structures, processes, governance, documentation that needs to be filled in, although it's not really valuable. And if there's no clear why are we doing this, there will never be the courage, the willingness, the commitment to actually do something about those old things that have been in place for, let's say, like 20 years.
Love the word commitment, you know, that commitment to something bigger. I just wanted to see if, while we talk through this, if there's some questions from our participants, either through the chat or they'd like to speak, if you'd like them to share.
Yeah.
Great. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, we'll bring you on mic. Otherwise, if you want to type something in the chat. So that commitment and that drive to something bigger than just this process and bringing in the human side is what I'm hearing, Gunther.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of every year I sort of switch the topics of what I'm speaking about at events. So I'm now going to speak about the topic of how engagement actually is key. And it's so much overlooked. So engagement of people, that's sort of maybe another word for commitment. Engagement of people, that is key, and it's so much overlooked. And I always say, like, you know what? Engaged people actually care a lot more about things like profitability, customer satisfaction, and so on. So what about creating an environment of engagement for people, or managing an environment so that people can feel that engagement? So, and it's so overlooked because, you know, profitability, customer satisfaction, all very nice. But what about engagement? What about sort of the value of what we're doing for the people actually creating, building those products? Not just the people consuming the product, users, consumers, not just the people funding our work, stakeholders, the CFO, the CXO, the leadership team, and so on. But what about the people actually doing the work? How do they feel about the value that this agile way of working brings to them?
Great series of questions. Veronica has her hand up. We're going to bring her the mic. And hello, Veronica. Oops, we got to get,
Hello.
okay, you're on mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I was wondering if you had an advice in order to introduce this conversation with the leadership. For example, in my organization, I tried to introduce this conversation with my previous leader, and it was not very fruitful conversation. And from what I gathered, he didn't really know why he wanted Scrum or Agile. And now I have this new leadership in place, and I was wondering if you have an advice on how to start this conversation.
No, like I said, I'm sort of in a fortunate position. So people sometimes ask me to come to help. So I ask for that access. What I see a lot with companies, we have this role in Scrum. It's called Scrum Master. I don't know whether you're a Scrum Master within your organization. So sort of the challenge that you're facing probably is, how does the organization, how can you get the organization to see you as a Scrum Master, as a point of contact, a speaking point for whatever is concerned with this Scrum thing? So that's a challenge. Although in most organizations, I hope that this whole agile transformation thing, or the introduction of Scrum, is sort of driven often by the leadership team. I don't know how that is in your company.
It was more, we started from, it was started by the leadership initially a few years ago, but there's a lot of leaders that are moving or are leaving the organization. Therefore, we're left with, we're trying to grasp the sense of this, why did we start Scrum, etc.
Yeah, so it's the current leadership are not the people that started it.
Yes.
So I would try to build on the idea of contacting them and saying, hey, you know, guys, a few years ago or a couple of years ago, we started this thing called Scrum, and try to sort of work your way into their room and maybe help them see why it was started and where you stand for now and how you can use their help. When I work with leadership teams, my personal stance is, and I personally believe that a lot, is, you know, in this agile movement and this Scrum movement, a lot of companies think that we're out to sort of remove all middle management from companies. Mm-hmm. My ambition is to help people reinvent their roles, even if they're middle managers. So I try to approach them with some sort of openness and in a way to help them reinvent themselves or rethink their role within the organization, which is very different from just blindly removing them. So I would, in your case, I would try to build on the idea that, hey, probably have a lot of questions about this whole Scrum thing. It was started by the people before you, and try to get yourself an invitation to update them on why it started and what you're running into and how you can use their help.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think a lot of times it comes from, you were talking about engagement, but I think from a lot of my dealings, it starts with having the courage to confront whatever needs to be changed. Because if you don't have that courage to confront that things need to be changed, then it's never going to change, no matter no matter how many good intentions you have to have that courage to say, to your point, we're going to uncover things. There's going to be obstacles and impediments, and we're going to have to have that, make sometimes hard choices in order to move forward. And I think as many times as you tell people how it's going to be difficult to do that, once they're actually in it and they're faced with those choices, they really didn't understand how hard it was going to be. So I think from my perspective and my opinion, I think courage is one of those key things that someone has to have in order to start any kind of change and transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just touched on two very important aspects of Scrum. The first is transparency. The problem with Scrum is it makes a lot of problems transparent. It puts them on the table, but that's just a start. Then, like you said, one of the values of Scrum is courage. Then you actually need the courage to almost embrace and cherish that transparency. Oh yeah, it's out there. And that's the difficulty, that a lot of the problems that we make transparent with Scrum are not created by Scrum, but people say, oh, that's the fault of Scrum. No, Scrum just shows them. Scrum doesn't tell you what to do with them, but Scrum will show you the problem. So transparency and then courage. And that's sort of, yeah, again, that illusion of agility. A lot of companies want to sort of increase their agility. And they often, and I don't, in a way, don't hold that against them. They use the tools and they use the means that they have. Having been sort of in a very traditional organization, you like to use cookbooks and recipes and follow the recipes and fixed plans and so on. But that's sort of not really the agile way. The agile way is about emergence. Things that emerge happen while you go. You let go of fake certainties as much as possible, and you just regularly inspect and adapt. So you introduce an iterative incremental process. So the difficulty is you want to become more agile. You want to use Scrum for that, an iterative incremental process. And iterative incremental process like Scrum, to really ingrain that and really embed that and get it into the DNA of the organization, requires an iterative incremental approach already in itself. You have to grow Scrum by using Scrum. But if you use old traditional cookbook recipes, fixed things, and often what I also see is sort of that thing called what I call mass production. All teams have to be agile, they have to work on the same practices, have to do the same things. And it's often expressed in a very strange thing that all teams in large organizations have to work on the same sprint length. And I'm like, what about tuning your sprint length to your context, your situation, your technology, your customer domain, your business domain? No, and that's sort of an industrialization of Scrum, which is at least not helpful. You can standardize on Scrum. You can introduce Scrum with everybody doing Scrum, everybody speaking the same language, everybody knowing what the accountabilities of Scrum mean, what sprints are and so on, and still have these tuned implementations of Scrum that may be varying across the organization. And still everybody speaks the same language. So you're standardizing on Scrum, but you're not trying to industrialize it. Because again, industrialization, after a while, together with all the other approaches that people have, lead to what I call the illusion of agility. And the illusion of agility, often it takes a few years, 2, 3, 4 years, often larger organizations, but it is always followed by what I call the deflation by reality. So people build up an illusion, they're thinking they become more agile, and at some point in time, their adaptiveness and their responsiveness turns out not to be what they were hoping for. So it's a deflation by reality. It's like sort of the balloon floating off, getting all of its air and falling flat on the ground again. It's what I call the deflation by reality. And that's sort of a hard wake-up call. But again, in my Scrum world, always about what I call inspection and adaptation. The inspection of the illusion of agility can be no more than just the start. It's about the adaptation. It's about the insight you're getting from that illusion of agility followed by deflation by reality. What are you doing with it? What are the lessons that you take from it? What are you going to do differently now? And that's, yeah.
Such a great conversation as we come to the end of our time, Gunther. You know, the thing that comes to mind as I sit back and listen about the deflation of reality, it's such an interesting idea, is that it's what we make it. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, you know, you talk about standardization. I'm thinking about standardization tests for kids in school. You can't standardize it 100%. You can have framework, but at the end of the day, as we humans grow and evolve. And so I'm hearing you really say, take the lessons, use the organic lessons and learning in the process to readapt, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so you can actually standardize on the framework, sort of the skeleton process. And within that sort of standardized framework, don't industrialize. Make sure that you build in variations depending on your context and your situation, your people, your markets, and so on. Yeah, so that's sort of what you're saying. That's cool. Yeah, so get a framework out there, have the framework adopted, and then allow a lot of variations.
Beautiful, beautiful conclusion. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your time today. Denise, anything you want to share?
No, I just I would like to ask Gunther just one more thing. If you can share with the audience something that they can take away and kind of implement, or whether it's in business or in their own personal life, as it relates to agility or the you know, changing and being more adaptive, what would that takeaway be? Can you share a takeaway with us?
Yeah, I'll share a takeaway, and by doing so, try to also address the one open topic we had. You know, you asked me about leadership and culture.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think about culture. Culture is the result almost. It's sort of a shadow, an underground, whatever. Don't focus on culture itself. You can't reprogram a culture, whatever that is. Culture is a reflection of what people believe in, what they do, how they act, how they behave. So think about culture in the same way that I think about the values. Think about behavior as a link between practices and culture values. So don't go just for culture. Don't try to, you can't reprogram people for adopting or adapting to a new culture. Grow a new culture step by step by step. Practice the small steps, iterative, incremental.
I love that. That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think that our audience will have a lot of value out of this conversation. So I really do thank you. And Barry, thank you for being my co-host today. It was wonderful to be with everyone.
It was wonderful to be on the show. So thank you very much for the invitation. I hope a lot of people out there find some value in it, at least. Yeah.
I'm sure that they will.
Okay, thank you very much.
Barry, anything else?
Just close it out, and that we've been with Gunther out of Antwerp, Belgium, sharing some amazing insights into Scrum and what I'll call the humanality or the human side of that. I look forward to having everybody back on another conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.